Chapter 662. Demon's Bargain. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then looked at Kai and said with determination, "Let's go." Kai nodded and followed the four-armed demon, pushing forward his bandaged body with visible effort. Seeing his friends suffering, Sonny gritted his teeth. The archer, meanwhile, glanced at him with a grim expression, and then said in his new, unfamiliar and ugly voice, "Sonny, I have one question. Can you answer it?" Sonny slowed down and turned to him, a deep scowl contorting the bestial lines of his face. "Of course, what is it?" Kai remained silent for a bit, then asked cautiously, Where exactly are we going?" Sonny blinked a couple of times, then tilted his head a little. "Oh right, where else? We are going to talk to Noctis." With that, he turned around and continued walking toward the immortal sorcerer's residence. The archer hurried to catch up, then said in a stifled tone, "Ah, that Noctis, the immortal transcendent, blessed of the moon, crimson beast of twilight, chain lord of the kingdom of hope and all that." Sonny glanced at him, then shrugged. "Yes, that Noctis. Don't worry though, he is indeed terrifying but not unreasonable." Together, they crossed the garden of the sanctuary and approached the beautifully engraved wooden door. A pair of sailor dolls were standing guard outside, their indifferent faces staring at them with hollow stillness. Noticing Sonny, one of them moved aside and knocked on the door, which then opened all by itself. The two of them entered and froze, unsure how to react. "What the hell?" Noctis was levitating above the floor, his legs crossed and his eyes closed. He might have seemed like a wise sage in the middle of a deep meditation, if not for dozens of empty amphoras of wine that floated all around him. The terrifying chain lord, blessed of the moon, the crimson beast of twilight, was dead drunk. Hearing someone enter, Noctis lazily opened one eye and stared at Sonny, then at Kai. Finally, he landed on the floor and yawned, causing all the amphoras to fall down and shatter, sending drops of wine flying everywhere and staining the luscious carpets. "Ah, Sunless, what a nice surprise to see you so soon. And you brought someone with you. What a hideous creature. Wait, did I say that out loud? No, surely not. I am too wise and courteous to make a rude remark like that, of course. Nice to meet you, whoever you are. Welcome, to my quarters." He gave them a radiant smile, then waved a hand, causing the whole residence to shudder and the shards of the amphoras to disappear without a trace. Then, Noctis walked over to a small table, picked up a fresh apple, and glanced at his guests with a curious expression. "To what do you owe the honor?" "To what do we owe? Wait, wasn't it supposed to be the other way around?" Sonny frowned, then glanced at Kai, who was staring at the immortal sorcerer with an inexorable expression on his burned, disfigured face. Finally, he cleared his throat and turned to Noctis. "Actually, I am here to deliver some good news. Do you remember the friends I told you about? Well, this is one of them. And yes, you did say it out loud." The sorcerer stared at Kai, blinked a couple of times, then took a bite out of the apple. "Oh, so this is one of the friends that you were supposed to find after visiting an island that doesn't exist, despite not knowing how they look, where they are, and what they are called. He just happened to be here in my sanctuary. How fortunate." Sonny smiled. "Indeed, this is Nightingale, my dear friend. A man with a voice of an angel and a face to go along with it." Kai spared him a sidelong glance, then bowed slightly and forced out a grating, creaky greeting. "It is nice to meet you, Lord Noctis." The sorcerer shuddered and looked right and left, then shook his head. "Gods, Sunless, do not ever mention those creatures again, even in jest. Angels are not something to be called upon, whether by name or in passing." Then he briefly touched the symbol of the moon on his forehead and sighed. "Anyway, I am glad that you have found one of your friends. Have the two of you discussed my proposal?" Sonny hesitated for a bit, then answered somberly, "No, we have not. We still need to find 2 more friends for that, however. He sighed, knowing that the luxury of having a choice was looking more and more distant by the day. But he needed the sorcerer's help and his knowledge to find and retrieve Effie from the mysterious temple of the chalice. In that particular matter, he was willing to compromise. Even if he gave up the secret of the glass knife, he would still be in possession of the obsidian one. Sonny crossed 2 of his forearms and said, I am willing to share the location of the Shadow Lord's knife with you, in exchange for some assistance. Noctis stared at him for some time, then suddenly grinned. Really? What assistance do you require? I am the most helpful person in the Kingdom of Hope, you know. Sonny raised 2 fingers. First, you will help treat my friend's wounds. Second, you will help us rescue another of our other friends from the place she is being held in. He thought for a bit, and then raised a 3rd finger. Oh, and also coins. You will give me lots of Noctis coins. The sorcerer ate his apple in silence for a bit, then laughed. Well, I think I can do 2 out of those 3 things at least. No problem. So tell me, where is your other friend being held? Sonny lingered for a few moments, still hesitant to make the bargain. Finally, he sighed and said, Temple of the Chalice. Noctis suddenly choked on the apple, coughed violently a few times, then grabbed a glass of wine and nervously emptied it. Then, with a flushed face, he glanced at Sonny and forced out a strange smile. 1. I think I can do 1 out of those 3 things at least. Sonny scowled, surprised by that reaction. He glanced at Kai, then motioned for him to sit down. From the looks of it, this conversation was going to be a long one. The archer cautiously lowered himself onto a nearby chair and let out a quiet groan of pain, then looked around, a hint of curiosity appearing in his cloudy eyes. His gaze lingered on various pieces of furniture and exquisite decorations, then finally settled on the flustered sorcerer. Noctis seemed to have regained his composure somewhat. He stared at his half-eaten apple with a somber expression, then threw it away and sat down himself. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. The 3 things you asked for are not that easy to accomplish. The immortal glanced at Kai, then raised 1 elegant finger. I can help your friend Nightingale recover from his wounds somewhat. Those burns were not delivered by mundane flames, and so even I would not be able to restore that which was destroyed completely. With my help, he will be able to regain most of his strength and vitality. I can also repair the damage done to his soul, but the flames, their mark will remain. Unless you want me to build him a completely new vessel, of course. Noctis smiled, and then glanced at one of the wooden mannequins, which was in the process of disposing of the carelessly discarded apple. Something like that, but much better. Kai shivered. Will I be able to draw a bow and control soul essence after you treat my body? The sorcerer nodded. Of course, you might even grow stronger than you were before, but your face, I am sorry to say this, Nightingale, but it will remain as hideous as it is now. The pain that consumes you will subside but never go away completely. If you agree to transfer your soul into a doll, on the other hand, your strength will diminish slightly, but you won't have to endure that suffering anymore. I can also promise to make a truly beautiful vessel for you, one worthy of carrying even the most radiant of souls. The archer remained silent for a while, then smiled. No need. This face suits me fine. As long as I can draw a bow and help my friends, I will be content. Noctis looked at him silently, an expression of confusion written clearly on his face. But don't you want to become beautiful? Kai chuckled, his voice hoarse and grating. Then he shook his head and said simply, I already am. Both Noctis and Sonny stared at the archer with dubious expressions, thinking that he had lost his mind. Well, more than anyone else in the Kingdom of Hope had already lost theirs. His disfigured face was ugly, grotesque, and unsightly. What was he even trying to say? However, it did not seem that Kai felt compelled to expand on that strange statement. He just remained silent, calmly looking at the sorcerer. After a few moments, Noctis turned away and shrugged. Well, as you wish. The treatment will be long and painful, but it can be done. Then he raised a second finger and glanced at Sunny. The other thing you asked for, lots of my coins, was it? To be honest, how do I say this, no? Sunny blinked, surprised. What, why? The sorcerer yawned, then made a helpless gesture with his hands. What can I say? Making those coins takes time. Do you know how long it took me to create a few thousand before? Each coin contains a piece of a corrupted soul, after all. That is the reason why they are so valuable, precious, and coveted by everyone in the Kingdom of Hope. He thought for a few moments and added absent-mindedly, "Oh, now that you reminded me, only most of the souls were corrupted. I think there were a few humans I fed to the mimic as well. Regardless, all those coins were consumed when that poor fool claimed the obsidian knife from the altar. So, if you really want me to make new ones, I guess I can quickly kill everyone here in the sanctuary and cook up 100 or two." Sunny shivered, then hurriedly raised his hands. No, no need. Let's not kill anyone yet. Noctis smiled. Are you sure? Well, all right, so then. He raised the third finger. Lastly, the Temple of the Chalice. I am sorry to say this, but there is absolutely no chance of me ever going anywhere near that place again. Not that I could, even if I wanted to. And I don't, ever. Sunny stared at the sorcerer with a deep scowl, then gritted his teeth. Why, what is so terrible about that place? Noctis shivered, then sighed and nervously sipped his wine. Oh, it's not that it's terrible. It's just that men aren't allowed to enter the temple unless they are serving a woman. They put that rule in place, after the last time I visited. Sunny really tried to not let his face change and simply glared at Noctis, his eye twitching. Uncomfortable under that murderous gaze, the sorcerer shrunk and looked away. A low growl escaped from Sunny's mouth. Who cares? You are one of the chain lords. What can they do if you decide to break that rule? Noctis chuckled nervously. You don't get it, chain lord or not. You see, Sunless, as I said, my lands became somewhat of a refuge for those who seek it. And one of the groups of refugees I sheltered was the remains of an ancient and rather terrifying sect. This sect takes in orphaned girls, especially those born with red hair, and trains them to become perfect vessels of war. His deadly tools, priestesses, and heralds, the war maidens are not someone to be trifled with. He grew silent for a moment, and then added, in fact, they only needed my protection because there was a schism within the sect, and one of their disciples left to create her own cult. However, since no one can really leave that sect alive, her departure was not amicable. Those who survived it came here to build the Temple of the Chalice and remained there since. Oh, and that runaway disciple of theirs, I think you have already met her. Sunny grew cold and leaned back, feeling both of his hearts skip a couple of beats. Then he closed his eyes for a few moments and finally said in a hoarse voice, Do you mean to tell me that the sect that dwells in the Temple of the Chalice is where solving comes from? Noctis nodded and gave him a ghostly smile. Exactly, that is where that fiend was raised, and there is a bunch of little monsters just like her being trained there as we speak. I mean, no one can really compare to Solvin, but they are not too far off. So you can understand why I am reluctant to break my word and make enemies of the war maidens, right? Sunny remained silent for a while, and then sighed heavily. Holding the emerald amulet in one of his calloused hands, he thought, well, tough luck, because that is exactly where the glass knife is. Despite his grim mood, Sunny felt a bit of vindictive satisfaction when he saw the sorcerer's handsome face pale, and the glass of wine slip from his hand. A tense silence settled in the opulent residence of the mad sorcerer, who, meanwhile, was staring at Sunny with an indescribable expression on his pale, beautiful face. Noctis didn't seem happy at all despite finally learning the secret that he had been searching for all this time. In that silence, Kai's hoarse voice suddenly resounded, full of polite curiosity. "I am very sorry, but that glass knife you're talking about, why exactly do we need it?" Both Sunny and Noctis turned to him. After an awkward pause, the immortal scratched the back of his head and answered. "Ah, that thing, you see, is the only thing that can kill Severus, the blessed of the sun, and I really, really want to kill him." Noticing a slight confusion on the archer's face, he thought for a moment, and then added, "Right, these days people call him Severax, the Ivory Lord. You have heard of him, yes?" Kai lingered for a bit, then looked down at his bandaged hands and said evenly, "Yes, you might say that I have." He closed his eyes for a moment, and then smiled. "In that case we must retrieve the glass knife. And our friend, Lord Noctis, surely there is something that we can do. You know a lot about that sect of theirs. Is there a way for you to enter the temple of the chalice, find both the knife and our friend, and bring them back to the sanctuary?" Noctis stared at him for a while, then shook his head. "No, there is no way for me to invade the temple. At least not without destroying it completely, which would doom that friend of yours along with the rest of the sect, sadly. That is also one of the places I can't infiltrate in disguise. Infiltrate it again, I mean." Sunny and Kai glanced at each other, and then the archer cautiously asked, "If that is the case, what if we infiltrate it instead?" The sorcerer stared at them with surprise, and then laughed. "Sunless and Nightingale, what a strange pair you are. Do you not know fear? I have just told you how frightening the war maidens are." Sunny smiled, showing his sharp fangs, and then shrugged. Kai shook his head and answered for both of them, saving him from having to do so. "Oh, on the contrary, both of us are actually very cowardly. But Lord Noctis, you might not know this, but Sunless and I, we can be a bit frightening ourselves." The immortal transcendent gave them a dubious look, and then shook his head. "Somehow I believe it. But no, it doesn't matter. Even if you are willing, you can't get into the temple of the chalice. Only women are allowed inside, and not any women at that. They will only give passage to female warriors of utmost skill, those who are veiled in dread and the smell of numerous bloody battlefields, maybe with a couple of lowly servants at best. You are both men, so it is useless to even try." Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then sighed deeply and said, "Actually, that won't be a problem." Noctis blinked a couple of times and looked at him with confused amusement. How so, Sunless?" The sorcerer gave him a strange look, and then asked with a mischievous smile, "Is there something I don't know about you?" Sunny glanced at him darkly, scowled, and answered in a sharp tone, "There's plenty, but that was not what I meant. I just have a female warrior of dreadful skill at hand." With that, he summoned Saint. 2 ruby flames ignited in the depths of his shadow, and then the taciturn demon stepped out of it, wreathed in darkness. Her graceful figure appeared in the middle of the sorcerer's residence, and then the shadow turned her head slightly, staring at the master of the place with cold indifference. Noctis looked back at her, his eyes widening, his lips trembled. That. The sorcerer leaned forward, his expression frozen, and then suddenly clenched his fists with excitement. "That armor, the design, the fit, O gods who forged that masterpiece, Sunless, please tell me." Saint tilted her head a little, while Sunny and Kai stared at the immortal transcendent with inexorable expressions. After a few moments of dead silence, Sunny cleared his throat. Actually, I am not sure. Prince of the Underworld, I think. Wait, haven't you seen me wearing a similar armor?" Noctis glanced at him with confusion, then waved a hand dismissively. If I did, you must have not done it justice. This beauty, however, so it was Hope's little brother, huh? Who knew he had such impeccable taste? Finally, the sorcerer became aware of his surroundings and moved his gaze up, staring right into Saint's ruby eyes. His smile widened, but then grew rather strange. He glanced at Sunny with confusion. "Sunless, this is one of your shadows, yes. How come she is more powerful than you? Oh, did you inherit this sublime creature from the Shadow Lord? That rogue, he had been hiding such a treasure from me all that time." Sunny did not like the way Noctis was looking at Saint one bit. In fact, he suddenly felt a very strong impulse to wipe the lecherous smile off the immortal's face, which would not have been very wise, considering who that immortal actually was. He gritted his teeth. "No, if you must know, I've created her myself, and also she can hear you. Have some manners, will you?" Noctis froze, then flinched and suddenly turned very courteous. Sorry." He glanced at Saint, then walked around her, studying the taciturn demon with a very serious expression. The shadow didn't move, seemingly uncaring of his presence. Finally, the sorcerer returned to his previous spot and smiled. "That shadow of yours might indeed be allowed into the temple of the chalice. She has a presence about her. Even I am impressed. The two of you will pose as her servants, I assume." Sunny and Kai looked at each other, then nodded. The sorcerer turned away, thinking, then said thoughtfully, "That might actually work. Once you are inside, you can find your friend and locate the glass knife. That will be extremely dangerous but not impossible. If you succeed, I can ensure your safe escape, however." Noctis glanced at them, his expression growing somber. "Sunless Nightingale, if things go wrong inside the Temple of the Chalice, even I won't be able to save you. You will be on your own, so ask yourself seriously whether or not rescuing your friend is worth risking your lives over. You can make new friends, you know, but you can only die once." Kai looked at the immortal sorcerer and smiled. "It's worth it." Sunny wasn't so quick to speak. After a while, he snorted and looked away. "I don't make friends easily, so the ones I do have are extremely valuable. One has to protect their valuables, you know. That's just basic logic." He glanced at Noctis with a dark expression and added, "Besides, who says that you can only die once? I have already died 100 times, and that was just after meeting you. Killing me is really a very troublesome endeavor." After their conversation with Noctis was done, Sunny and Kai left the sorcerer alone. The immortal needed some time to make preparations, so they had a few hours left before the archer's treatment was going to begin. After that, they were not going to see each other again until it was over, which would take at least a week. Walking through the beautiful garden of the sanctuary, Kai remained silent for a bit, and then said with a smile, "Well, I think that went well." Sunny glanced at him with a dark expression. "You think?" The archer shrugged, then frowned a little. The bandages covering his disfigured face moved, revealing a confused expression. "Did it not?" Sunny shook his head. "No, we have been swindled, actually. Think about it. I wanted to get 3 things out of Noctis in exchange for revealing the location of the glass knife to him. Heal you, rescue Effie, and receive his enchanted coins. Not only did he force the secret out of me without even lifting a finger, he even fooled us into retrieving the knife in his stead, while thinking that it was our own idea, no less." He grimaced, then let out a heavy sigh. "Scary, he is a cunning trickster, and my own mind seems to be dulled by the curse of hope. Still, all is well. Noctis will heal your body, nothing else matters." Kai frowned when Sunny mentioned Hope's influence, but didn't ask anything, revealing that he had made the discovery himself. After a while, he said, "When you put it like that, I do feel a bit foolish. But Sunny, if you knew that we were being swindled, why didn't you try to drive a harder bargain?" Sunny shrugged. "There was no point to. I did not expect him to honor all 3 of my requests. Anyway, 2 of them were just for show. While those coins of his are useful, I can do without them. As for rescuing Effie, that is our own task. I would not have entrusted it to an outsider, especially an ancient transcendent with mysterious motives. He remained silent for a few moments, and then added, "We will have to ally ourselves with at least one of the chain lords in order to conquer this nightmare, but becoming dependent on someone else's strength is a slippery slope. In the end, we can only put trust in our own efforts." Kai tilted his head a little. "So, those two requests were just bait, and your real intention had only been to get Noctis to heal me." Lost in thought, Sonny simply nodded. The archer smiled, then mumbled under his nose, "I wonder who swindled whom then." They reached their corner of the garden in silence and sat down on the grass. There was so much Sonny wanted to tell Kai, and so much he wanted to ask. He was sure that Kai felt the same. But without even having to say anything, both of them decided to remain silent. They had already shared some things about their experiences in the nightmare, and as for details, that was going to have to wait until the cohort was back together. Even knowing that it was foolish, they both held on to the feeling that by postponing this conversation, they were somehow increasing the chances of the other two members joining them unharmed. After a while, Kai asked, Do you think that she is all right? Effie, from what Noctis said, that sect is incredibly ancient, formidable, and cruel. If Effie was sent into the body of a disciple with her temper, I hate to admit it, but I am afraid for her. Plus, none of the maidens is allowed to leave that temple alive. How are we going to take her away?" Sonny remained silent for a few moments, then shook his head. "Effie is more resilient than any of us. Don't forget, she survived in the Dark City far longer than you or I completely alone. She held the line during the siege of the Spire and survived that too. Effie will be fine. The War Maidens are not as formidable as you might think either. After all, the Temple of the Chalice is destroyed in the future, and all of them are dead. I've seen the bones myself." His face grew somber when he remembered the furious wraiths whom he had slain to create his third core. Who could have known that the ruin he had already explored and the Temple of the Chalice were one and the same? Judging by the destruction that reigned over the ancient temple in the future, someone was going to obliterate the fearsome sect between then and now. The War Maidens weren't invincible. Kai sighed. "What about Cassie? There is no sign of her. She is not like the rest of us. Her combat skill is commendable, but her aspect is not tailored toward direct confrontation, and with how terrible her flaw is." He grew silent, reluctant to finish the thought. Sonny grinned. "Cassie, she is the last person you should be worried about. Believe me, she is doing fine, probably better than any of us." At least, that was what Sonny wanted to believe. His flaw did not prevent him from saying those words aloud, so he must have been convinced that the statement was true to some degree, at least. However, that didn't stop his heart from growing cold and heavy. He sighed and then added in a grim tone, "Who you should really be worried about is our fifth friend." Kai frowned and looked at him with a dark expression. "It has to be that person, right? The Prince of Valor." Sonny hesitated, then nodded. "That is what I believe as well." The archer gritted his teeth and turned away. "It doesn't matter. Here in the nightmare, all of us are allies, are we not?" Sonny looked down, his black eyes growing even darker. After a while he said, "We are meant to be. However, that doesn't mean that we have to be." He sighed, and then looked at the people going about their lives in the distance. "Mordred is unpredictable and dangerous. I don't know what his goals are, but in this nightmare his power would have grown considerably. Don't forget that he was the one who discovered this seed in the first place, and that wasn't by accident. He was searching for it on purpose. He is after something." Sonny grew silent for a few moments, and then added, his voice turning grim. "Plus, there was already something wrong with Mordred in the waking world. Who knows what effect hope had on him, if he had truly gone insane." He shuddered. "Then the immortal saints might end up not being our biggest problem." With that, Sonny stood up and summoned the vambrace of the puppeteer's shroud, then glanced at Kai with a strange glint in his eyes. Anyway, since we have a few hours left before Noctis straps you to a table and does spell knows what to your body, how about you show me how to properly use a bow, while you still can? While there's a chance, I mean. The sun was slowly drowning in the darkness of the void, and as it did, a veil of shadows was devouring the world. The western horizon was still aflame with the scarlet pyre of the sunset, but the somber night was already approaching from the east. On a desolate island covered by tall pillars of jagged rock, a numinous temple stood, its beautiful stone walls painted red by the light of the drowning sun. All around it, countless swords were thrust into the petrous ground, rising from it like a solemn graveyard of steel. There was only one path through the forest of blades, and as the twilight of dusk approached it, a dull, echoing ringing suddenly resounded from the darkness, then traveled through it, slowly growing closer and closer. It was the sound of adamantine hooves ringing against stone. Soon, 4 crimson flames ignited in the shadows, and then revealed themselves to be 4 eyes. 2 belonged to a Stygian destrier, the other 2 to its dark rider. The steed was black as night, with dreadful horns crowning its head. It walked forward with a steady pace, fearsome and noble, lean muscles rolling under its lusterless coat. The rider was a graceful woman in intricate onyx armor, her face hidden behind the visor of a closed helmet, with only ruby lights shining through it with indifferent resolve. Her presence was both calm and fearsome, full of quiet confidence and frightening strength. The blade of a great odachi rested on her shoulder, its steel as dark as the heart of the night. 2 steps behind the taciturn knight, 2 creatures walked with their gazes lowered to the ground. One was a towering, 4-armed demon dressed in a black kimono, his dark hair tied with a silk ribbon. The other was a strange human with skin that resembled polished bark, wearing a fitting dark garment made of soft silk, his disfigured face hidden behind a wooden mask and drowning in the shadow of a deep hood. Neither of them was armed. The Dark Knight led her horse to the first steps of the path through the graveyard of swords and stopped, waiting. Her ruby eyes burned with cold calmness, as if the woman had a heart made of stone, incapable of feeling fear, unease, or trepidation. Her servants, however, were not as aloof. Both stole glances at the magnificent stone temple, tension clearly written on their faces. A few moments later, the human asked quietly, "It is too late to turn back, isn't it?" The demon did not respond, not that he was capable of speaking in the human tongue. Instead, he simply nodded, then froze as if sensing something. The other servant sighed and grew silent as well. There was no one and nothing around them, just the pillars of jagged rocks and the swords thrust into the ground. The island was awash in the blood-red radiance of the dying sunset, with deep shadows nesting in the spots from where the sunlight had already fled. A gust of wind suddenly blew, bringing with it the smell of iron. And then, out of nowhere, they were surrounded by a dozen silent figures. All of them were beautiful women, wearing light garments made of red silk. Their bodies were slender and supple, their skins smooth and soft. The sight of them might have been alluring if not for the sharp coldness of their eyes, the ruthless expressions written on their tantalizing faces, and the murderous glint of their blades, all aimed at the uninvited guests. Sonny shivered. A damnation. Noctis had not been joking when he described the war maidens as fearsome. Even though these women were just awakened, his intuition was screaming that they represented mortal danger. However, Sonny did not need the help of his enhanced sixth sense to understand that. The feeling he got from the female warriors was the same as he had experienced a few times before in his life, when facing true battle masters. Morgan of Valor had given him the same frightening sensation, as well as Oro of the Nine, Master Jet, Nephis, and a couple of others, all of them elite combatants of the highest tier. Some of these fiends he had fought and somehow survived, but not without shedding a lot of blood and receiving deep scars, if not on his body, then on his soul. And right now, he was staring at 12 of such monsters, and these were just the sentinels, no doubt. Who knew what kind of battle saints would he meet inside the temple? No wonder this sect had been Solving's cradle. Full of bad premonitions, he made sure to not make any sudden movements and continued staring at the ground. His role during this part was rather simple. He just had to do nothing. Her master might have been apprehensive, but Saint didn't seem concerned at all. She turned her head slightly and looked down at the war maidens, her gaze as calm and indifferent as always. Noticing her calmness, a few of the female warriors gripped their weapons tighter. One of them, a tall woman with red hair and eyes the color of steel, frowned a little, and then asked in a raspy voice, "What brings you to the Temple of the Chalice, demoness?" Saint, of course, remained silent. Instead, Kai took a step forward and bowed, then spoke, his ugly voice sounding like grating scritching of rusty metal. "Greetings, warriors, my lady." The war maiden looked at him with distaste and interrupted. "Who allowed you to speak, man?" Kai remained bowed for a few moments, then straightened and looked at the woman from beneath his hood. "My lady's voice is not for you to hear. She only speaks to those who bested her in combat, and thus she has not spoken ever since taking this solemn vow." The war maiden remained silent for a few moments, studying Saint's graceful and fearsome figure. Then she smiled darkly. "She must not have fought anyone worth fighting then. You are her servant." Kai nodded. "Indeed, I am her voice and that creature over there is her shadow. We serve the lady." The woman lingered for a moment, then glanced at him and raised an eyebrow. "What is a human like you doing in the company of two shadows?" The archer remained silent for a few seconds, and then responded. "A long time ago, evil people captured me and locked me in a deep, dark well. I was going to die in there of thirst and hunger, but my lady lifted the heavy grate and helped me escape, while that demon slaughtered the evildoers. I owe them a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid." The war maiden stared at him silently, then nodded. "You speak with sincerity surprising for a man. Tell me, then, why has your lady come to our temple?" Kai glanced at Saint and hesitated for a bit. Sonny felt his heart start to beat faster as well. This was the most dangerous part of their plan. In fact, he was still not entirely sure that it was going to be a wise move. However, both of them had decided that while not very wise, this was something that would give them the best chance to succeed. Full of tense anticipation, he silently gritted his teeth. Finally, the archer looked at the war maiden and said, his voice calm and steady, "She has come to take back that which belongs to the shadows, to retrieve the death of the ivory lord from your hands, whether you are willing to return it or not." The glass knife contained the string of fate that belonged to Severax, the chain lord of the Ivory City. It was his death, which the war maidens had received from the Saint of Shadows hundreds of years ago. Now 2 shadows came back to retrieve it. Sonny suspected that none of the sect members that had been alive all those centuries ago lived still, including the particular maiden to whom Shadow Lord had sent the glass knife before taking his own life. As such, none would remember the 4-armed demon who had delivered it, most likely. And yet the current disciples of the cult had to know what was being kept in their temple and how it got there. So, there was a chance that they will just hand it over to the original owners, no matter how slim. If not, they would allow Saint and her entourage inside at least. That was Sonny's hope, and judging by the fact that the maidens did not immediately attack after hearing Kai's provocative statement, his calculations were not wrong. The tall woman who had spoken to them grew still as soon as the glass knife was mentioned, a somber expression appearing on her face. She studied Saint's motionless figure, then said coldly, her raspy voice growing slightly hoarse, "So the day has come. How fortunate we are to witness it. Someone finally dares to challenge the Red Sect for the ownership of the ancient relic. Who knew that I would witness this children's story come true? She smiled darkly, then tilted her head, no humor in her sharp gray eyes. However, you are wrong, Shadow. The glass blade does not belong to you or any of your kin. It had been entrusted to our foremother, who passed on the duty of protecting it to her wards and through them to us. The woman lingered, then sighed. However, it is not my place to put you in yours. Come, demoness, let me welcome you to the temple of the chalice. With that, the war maidens slowly lowered their weapons, and then followed their leader as she turned to walk on the path through the graveyard of swords. Surrounded by them, Saint, Sunny, and Kai had no choice but to walk forward. After a few moments, the taciturn demon gracefully jumped down from Nightmare's back, who then dissipated into shadows and returned to Sunny's soul. Despite the fact that the beautiful female warriors had sheathed their swords, their hostility remained aimed at the three strangers, and their gazes were still as sharp and dangerous as steel blades. What an unfriendly bunch! Sunny sighed inwardly and then looked around through his shadows, paying attention to the countless swords thrust into the ground all around them. Somehow, he felt that each of these weapons had a history, a violent story of battle and bloodshed that ended in death. Perhaps some of these blades had once belonged to the war maidens of the past, but most must have been wielded by those warriors slain by the members of the sect. There were very many swords thrust into the ground around the stone temple. Soon they approached the gates of the magnificent structure and were led inside. Sunny was somewhat familiar with the interior of the ancient shrine, but it was hard to bring together two pictures that lived in his mind, one of a desolate ruin, the other of the austere, but formidable and perfectly maintained temple fortress. They were ushered into a spacious entrance hall, where Saint followed his command and stopped, as though unwilling to go further. The tall maiden with gray eyes glanced at her and smiled coldly. "Wait here, demoness. I will inform the elders of your arrival and your challenge." Saint stood with the blade of the soul serpent resting on her shoulder, motionless like a beautiful statue cut of black onyx. Her presence was aloof and indifferent, as though the three of them were not surrounded from all sides by fearsome warriors, with no way to escape. The tall maiden left, but the rest of the sentinels remained, surrounding them in a wide circle. Their faces were calm, but their eyes remained sharp, steady, hands laying on the hilts of their swords. Under their gazes, Sunny didn't dare to send one of his shadows to scout around the temple, however. He also didn't need to. Instead, he listened to the sounds surrounding them with curiosity. The temple of the chalice seemed silent, but somewhere far away, a repeating sound could be heard. The sound of something blunt hitting flesh, over and over again, and an occasional rattle of chains. Disturbed, he frowned slightly and then glanced at Kai. The archer stood on the other side of Saint, his face hidden in the shadow of a deep hood. His pose seemed both polite and relaxed, however. Sunny could feel a strange tension hidden behind this casual stance. He frowned and then moved his hand slightly, attracting his friend's attention. Kai lingered for a moment, then spoke in the language of the waking world without turning his head. "Yes, I found it." Why would Sunny need to use his shadows to explore the temple if he had Nightingale by his side? Kai's awakened ability, after all, allowed him to see far and wide, and even peer through solid objects. Very few things could hide from his gaze. So his task was to locate one of the two things they were looking for, the glass knife. And just in a few minutes, he had already succeeded. Kai, however, did not seem too happy. "Sunny, I think we might have a slight problem." "Damnation." Sunny scowled, not liking the tone of his friend's voice one bit. He turned his head slightly, glaring at the young man in the wooden mask. The archer sighed. "You see, in the center of the temple there is a large hall, and in the center of that hall stands a giant stone chalice. The chalice, is filled to the brim with raging white flame. That fire is just like the fires that burn in the sky below. In fact, I am pretty sure that one of those orbs of divine flame is somehow contained within it." He lingered for a moment and then added grimly, "The glass knife is on the bottom of the chalice, right in the middle of the annihilating divine flame. Damn it all. Why did it have to be the divine flame of all things?" The three of them were finally allowed into the central hall of the temple, where a tall chalice cut of a single slab of gray stone stood, full of blinding white fire. The hall was drowning in stark light, deep shadows, and suffocating heat. However, even that sweltering heat was too forgiving. This close to the orb of Sun God's flame, all of them should have been already turned to ash. Sunny stared at the chalice with a grim expression, remembering the suffering he had gone through in the sky below. This was a true remnant of the obliterating pillar of white fire that had been brought down on the kingdom of hope by a god, and then continued to burn in the depths of the shattered land, slowly devouring it until nothing but an empty void remained. The pale version of it that he was able to channel through the cruel sight was already immensely destructive, and this was the real deal. How was the chalice even capable of containing the annihilating white star? He shivered and then glanced under the surface of the stone vessel, noticing an intricate weave of ancient runes glowing inside the gray stone. An enchantment, and a powerful one at that. What kind of sorcerer had created it? Who had been powerful enough to contain a piece of divine fury? In any case, without knowing how to control the enchantment, if there even was a way to control it, getting the glass knife out was not going to be easy, or maybe even impossible. Their task just grew exponentially more difficult. Damn it all. Absorbed by the dire sight of the stone chalice, Sonny didn't even notice the three women standing in front of it for a moment or two. When he did, however, his mood dropped even further. Turned into black silhouettes by the furious white flame burning behind them, three ascended battle masters watched the uninvited guests with eyes full of cold, cutting, killing intent. One had red hair and wielded an odachi similar to his own, its blade forged out of vibrant scarlet steel. One had black hair and held a simple spear, its shaft covered by a complicated weave of runes. One had white hair and was unarmed. That last one scared him the most. Solving, too, didn't feel the need to wield a weapon. If the first two maidens seemed like warriors of terrifying skill, the third one gave him a sensation of being something much more than that. A true vessel of war, perhaps. He carefully looked around the hall, remembering how it had looked in the future. The stone slabs covering the floor had been cracked and misshapen, the mighty pillars broken and toppled over, the roof had collapsed. The walls of the hall, seemingly so strong and unassailable, had been shattered outwards, suggesting that something had detonated in the center of the hall with tremendous force. The chalice itself had been destroyed, with only a few fragments laying on the floor in a molten pile. And there had been human bones littering the hall, some still covered by the remains of red silk garments, with vengeful wraiths carrying murderous fury even thousands of years after the tragedy. Sonny glanced tensely at the dancing white flame, then shivered. Someone had come to the temple of the chalice and destroyed it, slaughtering all the fearsome maidens in the process. Had they been looking for the glass knife as well? Was he going to meet that terrifying being? Or had he perhaps met them already? Two faces suddenly appeared in his mind, that of Solving and that of Noctis. His thoughts were interrupted by one of the ascended maidens. The woman who seemed the most powerful, the fiend with white hair, looked at Saint with a cold expression and said, her voice echoing in the stark darkness of the hall, "I've been told that you wish to retrieve the legacy of our foremothers, Shadow." Saint lingered for a moment, then moved her head slightly, nodding. The maiden smiled, sending chills running down Sonny's spine. "Then your task is very simple. All you have to do is prove yourself before the chalice. Kill me and then my two sisters. If you do, the glass blade will be yours." Saint tilted her head a little, expressing an indifferent agreement. Sunny let out a furtive sigh of relief. So there was a ritual to release that glass knife into someone's hands. After all, a trial that those seeking it had to pass. A simple duel, or rather 3 consecutive ones, against the senior warriors of the ancient sect. These ascended were truly formidable, but fighting them was better than having to face against the entire sect. His worst expectations had not come true. As for whether or not Saint would be able to kill the 3 ascended priestesses, he wasn't sure. However, there was at least a chance. And after the leaders of the sect were dead, finding and rescuing Effie would be much easier. As the war maiden with white hair grew silent, another one, the woman wielding the scarlet odachi, spoke. "However, first, you will have to prove that you have the right to challenge us. You will fight and kill a disciple of each of us." As soon as she stopped speaking, the third one said, "Or you will die." Sunny hid a triumphant smile. 3 awakened warriors were not going to pose any threat to Saint, who was an ascended demon, and formidable well beyond her rank and class. However, something felt off. He couldn't tell what at the moment, but his intuition was filling his heart with unease. Sunny glanced at Kai and noticed a similar apprehensive expression in the archer's eyes. He nodded slightly, prompting the young man to step forward and bow. "My lady accepts. However, it is unbecoming of her to slaughter your disciples, fearsome as they may be. Such a fight would not be a struggle for her, and as such would not please the goddess of life, offending her in this sacred temple. If these disciples wish to challenge my lady, they will have to defeat her shadow first." The war maiden with white hair laughed, then took a step forward. "So she can only fight us after defeating our disciples, but our disciples can only fight her after defeating her pet demon. Fine, fine, let it be so. No shadow can defeat a vessel of war. He was going to die after your lady's body is torn apart anyway. Let the creature be destroyed first." With that, she turned to one of the younger war maidens and smiled darkly. "Let us not disappoint our guests. Go, bring the feral child I have the misfortune of calling my successor here. She will atone for her transgressions today by killing these 2 shadows." Sunny was pushed forward and offered a choice of weapons. After hesitating for a few moments, he raised a fearsome greatsword with his upper hands and took a buckler and a long dagger with the lower. Then he walked into the center of the hall and froze, watching the divine flames burn in the darkness. All things considered, things had turned out well. The ascended war maidens had been cunning, offering the lives of their disciples as sacrifices, no doubt in order to glean the secrets of Saint's skill before facing her. Knowing the enemy was half the victory. After all, by remaining a mystery while observing how their opponent fights, the 3 battle masters would have received an advantage that Sunny couldn't allow himself to give them. Now, however, he was going to fight and kill 3 of the awakened maidens, thus keeping Saint as mysterious as these battle masters were. Facing such fearsome opponents was not going to be easy, but he was sure of his ability to outsmart, overpower, and slaughter them. Fighting such skilled warriors was only going to enrich his mastery of shadow dance. More importantly, they were not going to have to fight against the whole sect. The chalice containing the divine flame was not going to be shattered, and the temple was not going to be turned into a ruin. Whatever it had been that had happened here in the real world would not befall Sunny and Kai, leaving them unscathed. All he had to do was to kill 3 young women one after another. They would be fearsome combatants, no doubt, especially due to the madness of hope coursing through their veins. But he had faced far worse. Sunny felt confident in his ability. A few moments later, however, his black eyes narrowed. Staring at his first opponent, Sunny couldn't help but shudder and let out a low growl. Damnation! When Sunny heard the white-haired war maiden refer to her disciple as a feral child, he assumed that she was speaking about an especially ferocious female warrior being trained in the ancient sect of war. What he had not expected, however, was that his enemy would turn out to be a literal child. A damnation. As Sunny watched with a grim expression, two of the awakened maidens dragged a girl of about 11, maybe 12 years of age into the hall, then threw her on the stone floor in front of him. The girl had a scrawny, juvenile body that did not seem to have touched on the path to maturity yet. Her short, wild hair was of a vibrant red color, almost the same as the torn silk garment she wore. Her skin was pale and white, or at least, it was supposed to be. Instead, it was blue and black, almost the same color as Sunny's own, which had been made to resemble obsidian by the embrace of his shadows. The girl had obviously been often and cruelly beaten, to the point that it was hard to notice a spot free of bruises on her once tender body. The whites of her eyes were hidden by the cloudy red layer of blood that had burst from ruptured vessels, making the child look like an actual beast. Hitting the floor, the girl remained motionless for a few moments, then let out a long sigh and slowly stood up, lean muscles rolling under her bruised and lacerated skin. Even though she seemed tall for her age, she was still too small to reach up to Sunny's chest. Curse these mad witches. Suddenly full of fury, he glanced at the three ascended war maidens with a dark expression, then looked down at the abused child in front of him. Was this whom he had to kill? Just a few moments ago, the task seemed so easy. The girl, meanwhile, finished picking herself from the floor and faced the war maidens with an insolent, contemptuous expression on her bruised face. With wild flames burning in her eyes, she spat a bit of blood on the floor and then bared her teeth in a feral grin. What now, you old hags? More training. Ah, and here I was just starting to enjoy my daily punishment. Despite the rude words and the recalcitrant tone, the girl's voice was soft and childishly high, and as the result, what she had meant to sound defiant ended up sounding comical instead. Flustered by that, she gritted her teeth, and then proceeded to make a rude gesture with her hand, as if to better articulate her point. Sunny's heart suddenly grew cold. He flinched slightly, his pupils widening in shock. No, 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 no. He was already torn about the fact that he would have to kill a child, and this was going to be a battle to the death, whether he wanted to or not. The war maidens had made it abundantly clear. Showing mercy would be the same as admitting defeat, thus surrendering both his own life and that of Kai to their slaughter. But when the girl spoke, things took a turn from bad to worse. Because even if he had not recognized that tone, which he instantly did, Sunny was pretty sure that the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Hope were not in the habit of expressing their meaning with their middle fingers. That was a thing humans in the waking world did. Which left only one possibility. The feral child in front of him was Effie. Goddammit. Now, there was no chance at all that he would kill his opponent and follow the ritual set for them by the maidens. All that stuff about not having to fight the entire sect he had felt relieved about a few minutes ago. Any possibility of that was basically gone. How were they going to get out of this one? He gritted his teeth, a low growl escaping through them. Hearing it, the senior war maiden smiled coldly and then stared at Effie. No training today, insolent child. Instead, a test. We have guests today, you see. Kill them, and I might order your older sisters to feed you today. You have been demanding food, have you not? At the mention of food, a somber expression appeared on the girl's bruised face. She hesitated for a moment, and then turned around, searching for these guests she was supposed to kill. Because of how the hall was lit, the figures of everyone who stood near the entrance and along the walls, Saint, Kai, and dozens of war maidens who were here to witness the challenge, appeared as dark silhouettes. The only one whom she could clearly see was Sunny. Effie stared at his abdomen for a few moments, confused. Then she slowly craned her neck, looking higher and then higher still. Her face gradually grew paler and paler until a hint of fear appeared in her eyes. "Whoa, hey there, big guy." She shivered, then glanced back at her teacher. "Are you joking? I am supposed to kill that monster." The war maiden shook her head. "Not a monster, a demon. Why are you not hungry?" Effie lingered for a few moments, then asked in a little voice, "Do I get any weapons, at least?" The white-haired warrior chuckled cruelly. "Your fists should be enough. Use your tongue if they're not. It has been sharper than a blade lately, after all." The scrawny girl grimaced, then sighed and clenched her fist, turning to Sunny with hunger and resentment mixing in the bright eyes. Her soft voice resounded in the hall, full of reluctant determination. "All right then, let's kill a demon. The things a girl must do to earn a dinner." Sunny lowered his sword, staring at her with furious intent. "You idiot, it's me. Are you going to recognize me or not?" A weave of runes suddenly ignited on the stone floor of the hall, creating a circle around them. There was some sort of a barrier preventing either from escaping now, and outsiders from offering them help. The only ones left inside were Sunny, Effie, and the three war maidens standing in front of the chalice. Sunny hissed, trying to get the child to look at him. "Crap, the emerald amulet. I better get it right now." He released the hilt of the greatsword with one hand, intending to use it to fish out the amulet from the folds of his kimono. "If Effie doesn't recognize me, I'll have to really fight her until I come up with a plan. Luckily, she is just an awakened. With my 3 cores and shadow augmentation, it should not be too." Before he could finish the thought, however, the scrawny girl suddenly lunged forward with shocking speed and struck him in the abdomen with her tiny fist. The towering 4-armed demon folded like a piece of paper, spat a torrent of blood, and was thrown a dozen meters back like a weightless doll. Crashing into a stone pillar, he sent a net of cracks running through its gray surface and then rolled down to the floor. Stunned by the tremendous, ridiculous force of that single blow, Sunny tried to push air into his 4 empty lungs and stared at the little girl with dread. Right, that is Effie, all right. Curses. Because of Effie's easygoing personality and affable attitude, it was easy to forget just how fearsome of a warrior she was. Out of all the members of the cohort, she had survived on the Forgotten Shore the longest. She had done so while hunting down nightmare creatures on the cursed streets of the Dark City all alone, as well. Mostly because anyone willing to help her would have been disposed of by the ruler of the Bright Castle, who had been scorned by her rejection. The fact that the young huntress had never bowed to his demands, despite the black mark placed on her, only went to show how unyielding her will really was. Her aspect made Effie a perfect instrument of war. While not as drastic as the dire but narrow speed augmentation caster had possessed, it was still great and wondrous. More importantly, it was an all-around enhancement: speed, strength, agility, endurance, resilience. Every facet of her physicality was elevated to an inhuman level. Sunny knew of her abilities better than most, since Effie had taught him how to wield a spear. However, due to the fact that their lessons had taken place in the real world, where the huntress was bound to a wheelchair, he never experienced her full strength in a fight himself. Until now. Crap, that really hurts. Before, Sunny had hoped that their strength would be more or less equal, considering that he was augmented by 3 shadows. However, it was not even close. That one blow almost shattered his body into pieces. That was only made more bizarre by the fact that it had been delivered by a scrawny child. Maybe if he had an additional shadow or 2. Sunny had become much more powerful, but Effie had grown much stronger after the Forgotten Shore as well. Her core was now fully saturated. More than that, while Sunny had been surviving in the Red Colosseum, she had survived a hell of her own, it seemed. Being tortured, taught, and tempered by the cult that had created Solving, of all people. Sonny spat some blood, gritted his teeth, and slowly stood up. This is not good. The little girl glanced at him with surprise and tilted her head a little. Huh, still alive, damn tough bastard. He thought of taking out the emerald amulet once again, but Effie gave him no time. A split second later, she was already upon him, her leg flying through the air toward his ribcage. Sonny had no time to think about anything. He didn't want to hurt his friend, but he also didn't want to die. And getting hit by this bruised, wild, monstrous girl was going to kill him soon enough, no doubt. I need to slow her down. Even if his ribs survived Effie's wicked kick due to bone weave, the organs protected by them were not that resilient. The shock would surely rupture something important. Gritting his teeth, Sonny thrust one of his lower hands forward, putting the sharp blade of the dagger in the path of Effie's small, bony and bruised leg. She was going to have to rethink that attack or risk having her calf cut wide open. Unless she was using her second aspect ability, of course. Cursed A. The dagger slid off the girl's skin without leaving even a scratch on it, as though it was made out of tempered steel. Luckily, Sonny had expected this outcome and was already dodging out of the way. Effie's shin hit the pillar instead of his side, sending a rain of large stone chunks and sharp shards flying through the air. Before Sonny could regain his balance, the next attack came, and then the next and the next and the next. Unable to seriously hurt the girl, he had no choice but to retreat under the onslaught of deadly strikes, receiving several glancing blows that left him reeling and in pain. The scrawny girl was very small, but made up for it by being incredibly nimble and swift. The little imp was so wily and fast, in fact, that it almost felt as though she was in several places at the same time. "Stop running, big guy, let us finish this quickly, I am hella hungry, you know." "Arg, would you slow down for a second, you devil child?" Sonny growled with unrestrained fury and brought the greatsword down, creating some space between himself and the advancing girl. He felt very, very, very frustrated. All he had to do for now was to let Effie know who he was. That was not very hard to do. There were many ways, really. He could use one of his shadows or summon a familiar memory, if only she gave him a damned moment to breathe and think. The problem was that Effie did not. She was also not fighting in any style Sonny was familiar with. He knew her usual technique pretty well, but this assault had nothing in common with it. In fact, her current ferocious style was leagues beyond what the huntress had been capable of in the past, both in terms of purpose and lethality. It was sort of breathtaking, even when performed by a scrawny child. A memory was the easiest option, since summoning one took only a thought and several seconds. However, that was also the worst option, because doing so would reveal his ability to summon things out of thin air to the maidens. He and Kai had not gone through the trouble of appearing unarmed just to give that advantage away immediately. "Think you fool. There had to be a better way." Sonny deflected another devastating kick and took a step back, then froze for a split second and threw his buckler away. The thing was hideously bent by now anyway. With one of his hands now free, he made it into a fist, sent it flying forward, and extended his middle finger with a vicious snarl. Effie, who was already preparing to launch another attack, blinked a couple of times, then looked up at the towering demon with confusion. "Ugh." Finally, using Effie's momentary confusion, Sonny lowered his hand and mimed grabbing the rim of a wheel and moving it forward and backward, as if pushing a wheelchair. The little girl frowned, then lunged forward and delivered a crushing strike, but this time her movements were a bit slower, allowing him to easily dodge out of the way, purposefully so. Making sure that Effie could see his hand, he attacked with the greatsword while simultaneously making a fist again and pretending to have an arm wrestling match with an invisible opponent. The little girl swatted the sword away with her naked forearm, and then her blood-red eyes suddenly widened. She craned her neck and stared at the towering demon with an inexorable expression, then blurted out in a soft, childish voice, "D doofus. Thank God took you long enough." Sunny pretended to attack her with the dagger, then dodged a similarly half-hearted kick and gave the little girl a short nod. Effie's face trembled, and then she whispered, Why the spell are you so damn tall?" Sunny stared at the little girl, trying not to lose his composure. "What is wrong with these people?" He had 2 horns, a mouthful of sharp fangs, long claws, and 4 damned arms, and yet the first thing that both Effie and Kai had reacted to was his height. Was he not allowed to be tall for once? Continuing to pretend to fight the monstrous child in earnest, he pointed to his chest instead of an answer. Effie, too, slowed down her relentless assault a bit, just enough to give him some breathing room without making her changed attitude obvious. A few moments later, when they were close to each other, she hissed quietly, "Let me guess, you saw the message I left that said to not come to the Temple of Chalice, and naturally decided to do the exact opposite." Sunny spun, avoiding her fist, and raised 2 fingers. The girl frowned. Someone else is with you. Cassie. Kai. It's Kai, so both of you decided to ignore my warning." She deflected his dagger to the side, grimaced when it slid over a barely healed laceration on her forearm, and then squeaked in her childish voice, "Well, good. I might have been too full of myself, thinking that I would be able to actually escape this damned place. So, I am really, really glad that you came." Sunny thrust his greatsword forward, narrowly missing the girl's head, and then let out a low growl. Effie gritted her teeth. "But Sunny, we have 2 problems. One is that these lunatics never let their disciples leave the sect alive. The second is that if one of us doesn't kill the other in this duel, my teachers are going to kill us both, so." She caught his sword with one hand, then brought her fist on its blade, shattering it and making Sunny stumble. "So I hope that you have a plan. No, I know you do, don't you?" Despite how beaten and bruised the girl was, her soft voice sounded optimistic and cheerful. Knowing that Effie was confident in his ability to get them both out of this dire situation alive, somehow, Sunny felt very validated. The problem was that he did not have a plan. In fact, he didn't have the slightest idea about how to survive this mess. Yet, so he simply shook his head, making Effie pale and grow silent. As they continued to fight, Sunny thought feverishly. He didn't see any chance of escaping the Temple of the Chalice without a bloody battle against the War Maidens, as well as any way for the 3 of them to come up on top in that battle. Effie was strong and fearsome, but she was not solving. She would not have been able to fight her way out of the sect as that fiend had. With Kai and Sunny added into the equation, however, things still didn't look too good. Out of the 3, Sunny was the powerhouse. Even though his physical might was lesser than that of the Huntress overall, he was a much, much deadlier creature. Added to that were his 3 shadows, 2 of which were ascended demons, while the 3rd was an awakened terror. Sunny alone was most likely enough to contain 2 out of the 3 senior war maidens, at least. Effie would have to handle the 3rd one, which would leave Kai alone against dozens of awakened warriors gathered in the hall. That wouldn't work. No matter how Sunny moved the elements of the theoretical battle, nothing gave them a good chance of escaping alive. However, there had to be a way. The War Maidens had been defeated in the future, after all, so they were not invincible. Thinking of the future, he hesitated for a moment, and then glanced at the massive stone chalice towering in the center of the hall, full of furious white flame. Unlike in the future, it was still whole and imposing, the complex enchantment that permeated the ancient stone holding the mass of divine fire contained inside. His face grew dim. "I don't like this idea. No, I don't like it at all." Indeed, he was not happy with the seed of a plan that suddenly appeared in his mind, not only because it would be extremely dangerous and hard to pull off, but also because going through with it had broader, far-reaching implications he didn't want to think about. But no matter how hard Sonny thought, he couldn't come up with anything else to do. If moving the elements did not work, the only way to achieve his goal was to change them. With a deep sigh, he concentrated for a few moments, and then gestured Effie to keep close. At the same time, several things happened. Outside of the circle of runes, Saint lowered the soul serpent and then outstretched one hand, which suddenly became shrouded in a swarm of white sparks. She took a small step to the side to shield Kai with her body. Both actions caused the war maidens surrounding them to grow tense, their hands gripping the hilts of their weapons. Within the circle, Sonny had become surrounded by countless onyx threads that ensnared his body. One of his 4 hands was enveloped by a swarm of scarlet sparks, one in a black fog, and the other 2 in a swirling mass of dancing sparks of white light. The 3 senior maidens overseeing the fight frowned when they saw the 4-armed demon undergo a strange transmutation. Although just a little, their stances shifted, revealing their readiness to intervene should a need arise. But they didn't move yet, reluctant to intrude upon the duel without an undeniable reason. A few seconds later, a kite shield forged out of dull steel appeared on Saint's arm, while the odachi she held silently slid into the shadows. Sonny was suddenly clad in intricate onyx armor, holding a somber spear in one of his lower hands and an austere takai in another. Finally, a black bow with a scarlet string and a strange arrow that seemed to be made out of a bolt of lightning appeared in his upper hands. Patient Avenger, Cruel Sight, Midnight Shard, Morgan's Warbow, Strike of Thunder, and Mantle of the Underworld, augmented by Memory of Fire. He had summoned all these memories at the same time, knowing that he might not have a chance to do so later. And there was one last memory that he had called upon. As the light around him suddenly dimmed, the shape of a small black lantern started to manifest itself in the air. Spinning around before the senior war maidens reacted, Sonny knocked the strike of thunder on the string of his bow. Then, he poured a massive flood of essence into the bow and drew it, activating the Death Dealer enchantment. Unbending enchantment's description. This adamantine bow demands a giant's might to be bent. Because of that, arrows shot from it travel as far as the eye can see and strike with terrible strength, piercing both armor and flesh. Death Dealer enchantment description. This bow is able to consume a large amount of essence to deliver an obliterating strike. And finally, Caged Lightning enchantment description. This arrow strikes as fast as a bolt of lightning and chains its devastating damage to several nearby creatures. Feeling his reserves of essence instantly diminish by a vast amount, Sonny gritted his teeth and released the string. At the last moment, all 3 of his shadows slid off his fingers and wrapped themselves around the strike of thunder. And so, this ascended arrow of the 2nd tier was sent flying from an ascended bow of the 4th tier. Its power augmented manyfold by the 3 shadows and the obliterating influence of the Death Dealer enchantment. A shot like that would probably be enough to kill a master. The arrow was too fast to be intercepted as well. However, Sonny had not aimed at any of the 3 senior war maidens. Instead, he aimed his arrow at the stone chalice, and not anywhere on it at that. No, he sent the strike of thunder at the exact spot on the ancient stone surface where the weave of invisible runes was the most intense and elaborate. Sonny doubted that even this combination of powers and enchantments would be enough to deal real damage to the stone vessel. However, if he could destroy a small but important part of its enchantment, the divine flame contained within would do the rest. As the bolt of lightning streaked through the air toward the chalice, he grabbed the little girl and dashed behind one of the columns, then knelt and hugged her with all 4 arms, covering her little body with his. At the same time, Saint pushed Kai back and raised her shield, covering them both. Before anyone could react, the furious lightning struck the side of the giant stone chalice. And then everything became white. The bolt of darkness-wreathed lightning shot between two of the senior war maidens and struck the side of the stone chalice. A flash of light drowned the hall for a split second, and almost instantly, 3 arcs of electricity tore through the air, traveling back to strike the sect leaders. Since there was no one else near them, the lightning did not chain further, spending all its might while coursing through the bodies of the ascended warriors. Sunny did not see any of that, however, because he was already dashing toward a wide stone pillar with Effie's scrawny figure held in his arms. Behind him, a single narrow crack appeared on the surface of the chalice, and through it a furious white light suddenly shone. A moment later, countless fractures appeared on the ancient stone, and then everything became white. Arg! Sunny was on his knees behind the column, his back to the center of the hall, hugging Effie with all his 4 arms. His vision was gone, replaced by an endless field of flawless white, and so was his hearing. He felt a shockwave go through his body and the pillar behind him shatter, turning into a rain of broken, melting stone. Then a flash of agony pierced his soul. Everything was enveloped by terrifying, suffocating heat. He felt it wash over him like a wave, and prayed that they would survive its immolating embrace. He had a reason to believe that they would. In the future, there had been bones littering the floor of the hall after all. That meant that when the real chalice exploded, not everyone around it had been turned to ash. Sunny also had the stalwart enchantment of the mantle of the underworld, providing him with high resistance to elemental attacks, as well as the underworld armament, enchantment, channeling and enhancing the protective effect of the memory of fire through the onyx armor. That was not going to be enough to withstand divine flame itself, but could save him and Effie, whom he was shielding with his towering body, from the heat produced by the flame. A few moments later, the white field veiling his sight suddenly dimmed and gave way to beautiful darkness. The shadow lantern was devouring the light surrounding its master, uncaring for what had produced it. After a couple more seconds, Sunny was finally able to discern the shape of his surroundings. The sight of the great hall was all too familiar. The stone chalice lay in a molten pile on the stone floor, which was cracked and shattered. Most of the pillars supporting the roof had toppled, and so did a section of the roof itself, revealing a piece of the night sky with stars shining on its black canvas. The walls of the hall were fractured and had collapsed outward, just like they would be in the future. All over the devastated chamber, small pieces of the divine flame burned. Some danced on shards of stone, slowly devouring them, some on the charred corpses of those war maidens that had been killed in the blast. However, the flames did not seem to be spreading. Strangely, there were numerous runes shining on what remained of the hall's floor and ceiling, weakening them. Perhaps because of those runes, many of the war maidens survived. Cursed! The 3 ascended were all alive, although 2 of the 3 were severely wounded, whether by the lightning of the strike of thunder, the explosion, or the divine flame, Sunny did not know. Some of their awakened disciples had survived as well, and were now slowly rising from the ground, shock and fury written on their pale faces. And Sunny was alive too, but not unscathed. His body was not damaged, but one of his shadows seemed to have been too slow to retreat from the chalice, and had gotten itself burned a little by the divine flame. Since the 3 shadows were manifestations of his soul, it was burned as well. Gritting his teeth, Sunny endured the pain and rose to his feet. Soul damage, well, what else was new? Just as he thought that, the shadows slid between the dancing flames and attached themselves to his feet, one cradling its damaged arm with 3 hands. Effie looked around with shock, sweat rolling down her little face. "The hell happened, you see crazy?" She spoke and instantly regretted it when a torrent of scorchingly hot air streamed into her mouth. Sunny evaluated the situation, then pushed the little girl away, gesturing at the far end of the hall. There, Kai was levitating above the floor, his hood torn and his wooden mask glowing angrily, as if seconds from catching on fire. The young man was surrounded by a whirlwind of white sparks, no doubt summoning his armor and weapons. He was also surrounded by a dozen surviving war maidens. Effie's eyes widened, and she took a step in his direction, but then hesitated and looked at Sunny with concern. What about the masters? He glanced at the three ascended warriors, and then simply pointed a finger at himself. The little girl wanted to say something, her eyes full of worry and unease, but then nodded and dashed away, summoning her own memories. Left alone, Sunny dismissed Morgan's warbow, transferred the cruel sight to his upper hands, and slowly walked toward the fearsome battle masters. Three shadows followed him, and whenever he passed, the light was destroyed and replaced by darkness. The four-armed demon in onyx armor stopped a dozen or so meters away from the leaders of the Red Sect and tilted his head a little, staring at them with his black eyes. The white-haired ascended, the only one who remained unscathed after the explosion, looked at him with cold hatred, then smiled wildly and spat. "Foul shadow, you dare challenge the three of us alone." The maiden with red hair gritted her teeth and moved her badly burned arm, raising the scarlet odachi into a battle-ready position. The one with black hair leaned heavily on her spear, then whispered something, causing the runes on the weapon to ignite with an angry red glow. Sunny remained motionless for a second, then shook his head and grinned, revealing his sharp fangs. A moment later, three terrifying creatures burst from his shadows, fury burning in their eyes. One was a giant serpent with obsidian scales. One was a dreadful black steed with adamantine horns and fangs like those of a wolf. And the third one was a graceful knight in onyx armor, wielding a charred kite shield and a stone sword. Together, the four shadows lunged forward. An awakened had no business fighting one ascended, let alone three, each radiating an aura of an aberrant battle master. But then again, as far as awakened went, Sunny was more than a little abnormal himself. He had already killed two masters before, Pierce, one of the wardens of the Night Temple, and the fearsome Red Priest, the slave overseer of the Colosseum. Both victories had been won by the skin of his teeth and cost him dearly. Sunny had even lost his head in one of those battles. The war maidens seemed far more daunting than both of those men, and there were three of them. The previous clashes with the ascended he had were nothing compared to the dire challenge of this one. However, during both of those fights, Sunny hadn't had the opportunity to go full out. The first time, Saint and Serpent had been preoccupied with the human echoes. The second time, he had been cut off from the spell, and thus from his arsenal of memories. But this time, nothing was preventing Sunny from unleashing the full and dreadful power of his divine aspect. It was time to show what he was truly capable of when nothing held him back. Fortunately, two of the war maidens had already been injured by Sunny's treacherous attack. So, although attacking the three of them alone seemed more than a little bit insane, there was a good chance that he would win this fight. As the three ascended prepared to deflect the assault of shadows, Saint lowered her shoulder, put it behind the patient avenger, and aimed the charred kite shield at the enemies. Burning Heart, enchantment description. This shield can store a portion of fire damage it receives to augment another weapon of its wielder or unleash a devastating shockwave. A deep metallic groan resounded from within the shield, and then an invisible shockwave exploded outward from its dull steel surface. The patient avenger had absorbed plenty of fire damage during the explosion of divine flames, and now all that furious force was released forward, shattering the chunks of stone that littered the cracked floor into dust and sending the war masters flying back, into different directions. Whatever chance of a coordinated defense they had before was now utterly gone. Without slowing down, Sunny and his shadow split. The soul serpent slithered between the dancing flames, lunging at the maiden that wielded a spear. Saint ran toward the maiden that wielded an odachi. And finally, Sunny and Nightmare flew toward the maiden that was unarmed, but radiated the most pressure. Come on! Everything was going according to plan. However, no plan ever survived a clash with reality. A moment later, something unexpected happened, putting a wrinkle into Sunny's stratagem. The woman with black hair twisted in the air and gracefully landed on her feet, plunging the tip of her glowing spear into the stone floor to stop herself from sliding back, into the white wall of divine flame burning behind her. And then, there were suddenly two of her. Two identical war maidens jumped to their feet, each holding an identical glowing spear. None looked like an illusion and both possessed real shadows. Both were made of flesh and bone, which meant that the threat she posed instantly doubled. What kind of an insane aspect is that? Sunny bared his fangs, changing the plan on the fly. Nightmare pivoted and switched direction, aiming to join Soul Serpent and help it destroy the two spear-wielding Ascended. One of the shadows cast by Sunny swiftly glided forward, wrapping itself around the black steed. The other two rose and embraced Sunny himself, since he was now facing the most fearsome of the War Masters alone. Saint was going to have to deal with her own opponent without any augmentations. He wasn't too worried, though. Out of the four of them, she was probably the most powerful. A moment later, the War Maidens and the shadows clashed. To Sunny's left, Nightmare and the Soul Serpent attacked the two identical black-haired women. Now that the Shadow Steed was apart from Sunny and outside the area where the Shadow Lantern was devouring all light, the effect of the Dark Destrier attribute was lessened, depriving him of its augmentation. However, the Dreadlord attribute was still working. No matter how confident and fearsome the War Maidens appeared, they had to be in the throes of fear and confusion deep down in their hearts. After all, their sacred chalice had just been unexpectedly destroyed, and scores of their sisters had been killed in the explosion. Added to Nightmare's mantle of fear, ability, even powerful Ascended like them would not be able to resist the creeping terror. And the more terrified they were, the more powerful the Black Courser would become. So Sunny was not worried about Serpent and Nightmare either. To his right, Saint clashed with the red-haired Ascended, their blades crossing with melodious ringing. The War Maiden pushed, causing the taciturn demon to stagger and make a quick step back. Considering how much the living statue weighed, this must have taken tremendous strength, so this one possessed some sort of a physical augmentation aspect. Her terrible burns seemed to be healing with incredible speed, too, which meant that the aspect gifted her with a miraculous regeneration rate, as well. And lastly, there was a deep nick left on the blade of Saint's stone sword. Either the enchantments of the Scarlet Odachi were especially powerful, or the woman possessed an ability capable of reinforcing her weapons, too. Still, Sunny was confident that his silent shadow would be able to win. The only member of their team he was somewhat worried about was himself. Raising the cruel sight above his left shoulder and lowering the midnight shard to his right thigh, Sunny lunged at the white-haired war maiden, who was still calm, entirely unscathed and unarmed. Let's see what kind of a fiend you are, then. Looking at the attacking demon with cold hatred, the woman simply outstretched her empty hands. And in the next moment, the stone shards and the dancing flames around them suddenly moved. What the? The shards of stone and the dancing flames moved, flying through the air toward the tall woman. Instead of crushing and burning her, however, they somehow assembled around her slender body, the pieces of stone levitating around it to form a strange armor, the fire shrouding her hands like incandescent gloves. Sunny suddenly felt a deep, dangerous sense of unease. How dare you, vile shadow? The voice of the war maiden thundered in the darkness that the shadow lantern had created. And then, two furious white eyes ignited in its depths, piercing Sunny with a murderous gaze. "How dare you challenge war?" A split second later, the maiden disappeared from where she stood, the stone slab beneath her feet exploding into a rain of shards. Almost instantly, she was already upon him, a flame-wreathed palm shooting forward to pierce his chest. Damnation! What is it with women of war always going straight for my heart? This is already the third time this has happened. Sunny awkwardly blocked the devastating blow, and felt himself being thrown back by the terrifying force of the impact. Luckily, the mantle of the underworld had withstood the touch of the divine flames that shrouded his enemy's hands, if just barely, the enhanced enchantment of memory of fire still coursing through its polished onyx. Arg! Something wasn't right here. Even for a master, the speed and strength of this woman were way too terrifying. With 3 cores nearing full saturation and augmented with 2 shadows, he was supposed to be near the realm of the ascended, at least, if not more or less on par with some of them. And yet, her might was far greater than his. That could have been explained by possessing an aspect that augmented one's physicality. But as Sunny had just seen, the white-haired war maiden seemed to be some sort of an elemental sorceress. I see how it is. Crashing onto the floor in a roll, he instantly threw the cruel sight forward to prevent his enemy from chaining the next attack after the first, and then slashed at her with the midnight shard. The blade of the austere takai scraped fruitlessly across the carapace of levitating stone shards surrounding the war maiden's body. It seemed that the effect of her aspect was broader than just elemental control. Not only was the fearsome leader of the Red Sect capable of manipulating the elements, she also drew power from them. The stone probably enhanced her strength and endurance, the fire her speed, attack power. Whatever it was, it seemed to also allow the white-haired maiden to perceive her surroundings, despite the veil of shadows his lantern was creating around them. With a ruthless scowl on her beautiful face, the woman easily swatted both the cruel sight and the midnight shard to the sides. However, she failed to defend against the sharp blade of the ghostly stiletto that suddenly appeared in one of Sunny's hands and slid between the chunks of stone protecting her body. The moonlight shard bit into the maiden's body, failing to sink deep, but still drawing blood. Sunny grinned. There was a benefit to having 4 arms after all. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" The maiden seemed more infuriated than hurt, though. The stone carapace swirled around her, sending the moonlight shard flying away from his hand, and then 2 incandescent fists descended upon him. A spark of flame traveled through the whirlwind of stone shards and licked her body, perfectly cauterizing the wound. Bad! The white-haired warrior and Sunny clashed, their speed and ferocity causing more destruction to befall the devastated hall of the temple. Since they were shrouded by a rolling cloud of darkness, no one would have been able to see what was happening under the veil of shadows, noticing only flashes of white radiance that tore through it from time to time. All they would be able to perceive were the furious sounds of a frightening, inhuman battle. The war maiden was faster and stronger than Sunny. Her aspect was fearsome, and her skill was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was different from how humans of the waking world fought, but in no way inferior. In fact, her murderous technique was utterly sublime in its deadly power, stark perfection, and lethal precision. She was also able to control the flow of essence through her body, with such an intricate and ingenious measure of control that it made Sunny realize how crude and clumsy his own, which he had been proud of before, really was. His essence was running low, too, because of how much he had spent on delivering the obliterating shot from Morgan's warbow. However, he was not defenseless in that fight. While the war maiden possessed a sublime technique, Sunny possessed a myriad of them. He was able to shift from one style to another effortlessly, dancing like a shapeless shadow, making it difficult to predict and prevent his next move. The cruel sight danced with him, swiftly changing its form from a somber spear to a mirror sword and jumping between his four hands. Sunny had dismissed the midnight shard, knowing that it would not be able to withstand the immolating heat of divine flames shrouding his enemy's arms. He relied on his versatility and deception to keep himself alive under the ferocious assault of the monstrous Ascended, and through all of it, he was observing how she moved, how her shadow moved, how they fought, how they reacted. Shadow Dance was slowly absorbing the War Maiden's sublime battle style, thus making her incredible technique more transparent and predictable. The process was helped by the fact that Sunny had recognized the same foundation in it that he had witnessed when Effie attacked him earlier. The two were a master and a pupil, after all. For now, Sunny was locked into a desperate defense, with no hope of launching an effective attack of his own. It seemed as though his death was only a matter of time, but in reality, he was just biding his time, waiting for the right moment to deliver a single but singularly inescapable strike. And soon enough that moment came. Sunny was battered and beaten. The onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld cracked and glowing orange in several places, as if on the verge of melting. His reserves of essence were almost empty, and his breathing was labored and arduous. One of his horns was broken, or rather cut cleanly, the edges turned glossy and black by the indescribable heat of the War Maiden's fiery palm. But then he suddenly saw it, an opportunity. There was probably not going to be another one of those in this dire fight. As the white-haired warrior raised her hand to deliver another terrible strike, he suddenly turned the blade of the cruel sight slightly, so that it faced the enemy with the flat side. And then Sunny activated the Light Eater enchantment of the somber spear, turning its blade into a source of bright, radiant sunlight. The War Maiden had used her aspect to adjust her eyes to the darkness, and for that reason, a sudden flash of daylight blinded her, while Sunny remained unaffected by it. He was relying on his shadow sense to move around anyway. His enemy was only blinded for a second, but in the battle at their level, 1 second might as well have been an eternity. Simply losing her sight would not have made the War Maiden defenseless, of course. A warrior like her would have been taught how to fight with her eyes closed. And indeed, she instantly shifted her body and moved her hands, preparing to deflect the most probable attacks. Unfortunately for her, Sunny had already gained enough insight into her style to know exactly what these movements would be, and so he knew how to slip through them. One of his hands suddenly shot forward, the clawed gauntlet shattering a piece of stone protecting the woman's neck. The other followed, passing through the momentary gap in the magical carapace and ripping her throat apart. A strange sound escaped from the War Maiden's lips. Her eyes widened, the white radiance burning in them growing dimmer. For some reason, Sunny felt himself be disturbed by that sight. The whirlwind of stone shards surrounding the maiden's powerful body rained to the ground. "She can't be a shadow." With that, the fearsome leader of the Red Sect fell to her knees, life draining through the terrible wound on her neck. All it took to kill her was one calculated, treacherous strike. Before the spell spoke, Sunny hesitated for a moment, then reached into a breach in his armor, grasped the emerald amulet and leaned down, whispering, "Find peace within me. This is the mercy of Shadow." A few moments later, after Sunny spoke, the spell whispered into his ear, "You have slain an ascended human, War Maiden Hilda. Your shadow grows stronger." He took a step back and grunted, pain and exhaustion permeating his battered body. "Why don't I feel happy?" Sunny did not mean to say those words aloud. With a frown, he pulled his gaze away from the corpse of the valiant maiden, briefly glanced at the emerald amulet grasped in one of his hands, and hid it back under the cracked breastplate of the mantle of the underworld. It was not every day that he achieved a victory in a battle against an Ascended. He should have been celebrating, But really, Sunny was not too fond of killing humans, at least those whom he did not hate. Feeling pain travel through his scorched body and observing the sorry state of the mantle, he activated its living stone enchantment and saw the stone-like metal start to restore itself. He also sensed most of his remaining essence flow through the armor, disappearing as it empowered the process. With a sigh, Sunny leaned on the cruel sight and looked around warily. He was not in the best shape, and the battle was not over. It wasn't time to celebrate yet. To his right, Saint was entangled with the red-haired Ascended, their weapons weaving a fearsome pattern of destruction across the remains of the Great Hall. The patient Avenger was glowing with an angry orange radiance, and her stone sword was surrounded with flames, augmented by the cold steel enchantment of the shield. It was somehow resisting the scarlet Odachi. However, the blade of the sword was covered by numerous nicks and cracks, as if it was seconds away from falling apart. The body of the War Maiden, meanwhile, was washed in blood but free of any wound, betraying the fact that she had been able to heal all the damage dealt to her by Saint. To his left, Serpent and Nightmare were fighting the two identical Ascendeds. One, surprisingly, was already on the floor, the black steed stomping viciously on her chest with adamantine hooves. The sight of it was both disturbing and frightening, even though Sunny knew that the dreadful horse was on his side. The second maiden was entangled in a furious battle with Soul Serpent, her enchanted spear flashing through the air and leaving deep gashes on the Stygian scales of the giant snake. Despite Serpent's advantage in size and might, the woman was too swift, cunning, and skilled to allow herself to be caught by its coils. What's worse, her weapon seemed to be able to follow the enemy into the shadows, striking at Serpent even when it dove into them to ensnare her. The black-haired warrior was truly terrifying. To be able to resist both an ascended demon and an awakened terror at the same time, even after being damaged by the strike of thunder, and the explosion of the chalice was something only the most fearsome masters of the waking world would have been able to do, if any. However, her luck had run out, because today she met Sunny. Stepping through the shadows, he appeared behind the maiden and struck her in the back, not at all concerned with how cowardly and dishonorable such an attack was, or would have been considered by some people rather. Honor was for fools, and while Sunny knew himself to behave like a fool on occasion, he was at least immune to this particular kind of foolishness. The blade of the cruel sight pierced the heart of the brave War Maiden and flashed with white incandescence of divine flames for a split second, dealing devastating damage to everything it touched. The woman died instantly, without even realizing who had killed her. At the same time, her second copy finally succumbed to Nightmare's hooves and stopped moving, her body a terrifying mess of torn flesh and broken bones. A moment later, it shimmered with a dark red glow and disappeared. The spell spoke. "You have slain an ascended human, War Maiden G. Venraver. Your shadow grows stronger. One more left." Regretting his decision to not let the serpent finish off the Ascended, thus replenishing his now empty reserves of essence, Sunny gritted his teeth and turned his head to glance at Saint. However, at that moment, the voice of the spell suddenly resounded once again. "You have slain an ascended human, War Maiden Kara. Your shadow grows stronger." What he saw was the War Maiden's decapitated body toppling to the floor, the taciturn knight standing above it with a shattered sword in her hand. The length of its stone blade, what remained of it, at least, was painted crimson, heavy drops falling down from it. Saint remained motionless for a few moments, then glanced at her broken sword with regret. Her shoulders moved slightly, as if the shadow sighed. Dropping the shattered blade, she then bent down and nonchalantly picked up the scarlet Odachi that slipped from the Ascended's fingers. Finally, the taciturn demon brandished the Odachi and turned around to look in the direction of the entrance to the Great Hall. "What is she looking at?" Sunny frowned, then suddenly shivered. Oh right, Effie and Kai. He spun, remembering that his friends were currently facing off against a dozen of powerful awakened warriors. However, he didn't have to worry. The war maidens, almost all of them, were already dead. Kai was just about to finish off the last one. The young man was clad in beautiful armor forged out of white steel and gold, wielding a swift saber. His battle skills seemed to have improved tremendously since their time on the Forgotten Shore. Those months in the army of the Ivory City must have taught him a lot. Effie was done with her share of enemies as well. The little girl was now wearing a familiar bronze armor, the white chiton beneath it replaced by the red silken tunic of the war maidens. The dusk shard was also there, on her hand. However, now the heavy round shield was almost the size of her entire body. Just then, Kai dodged a strike of his opponent, hovered above the floor at an impossible angle, and delivered an unexpected thrust to the war maiden's abdomen. A moment later, Effie slammed into her with the dusk shard. The female warrior fell to the ground, either dead or dying. Suddenly, the devastated hall of the Temple of the Chalice was enveloped in silence. The three of them, Sunny, Kai, and Effie, stared at each other with confused expressions on their faces. It was all over. Had they really? 1. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.